The circle represents the whole, the totality of all that is. However, every cult, every culture in human history, of which anthropologists estimate there have been at least 10,000, refracts and highlights a certain shape, a certain percentage of that totality, the totality in the species expressed as the possibility field, the probability field of all that we can be. Every cult refracts the circle, usually asymmetrically, to include portions of our possibility, our probability, and excludes, denies, suppresses, represses, and controls others with taboos, with shame, with law, with a variety of boundaries that say this is who we are and this is who we are not. Within a given framework, the cult's value hierarchy, these suppressions, repressions, etc., are sometimes self-evident, and sometimes it's not clear why exactly we would not be allowed to talk about important areas of data generated by the cult, particularly in patterns where large portions of the cult participate in certain behaviors, but they're not allowed to be talked about. Incest is one of them. Promiscuity, various things. They're not politically correct things to acknowledge, but they happen. The shape that a cult or culture creates is often a reactive response to an environmental phenomena. Traumatic earth events, for example, may emphasize masculine qualities of assertiveness, of physical strength, because they correlate in some way with the species' survival or that culture's survival in response to a given change, thus shifting the value hierarchy of a given cult towards a certain value and away from others that in some ways seem to have a less probable sense of survival. These often long outlive their usefulness. The alpha male, for example, could be useful in carrying women and children over snowdrifts, for example, migrating across the vast stretches of snow, etc., in the land bridges over to the Americas, where pure physical brawn might make the difference in a tribe's survival. With mechanized warfare moving more and more towards information, the same physical brawn, not so much. With established cultures, developing civilizations, large, bulky bodies can be a liability, ecologically and otherwise, and yet there's still the memory of thousands of years ago when such a trait could be useful. And cults are notoriously slow at modifying and updating their operating system. Thus it is that the very traits which at one time may have benefited a given culture become its liability, but are still artificially propped up, even as the new traits, that which needs to be born and emerge, in the ongoing adaptive relationship between people and environment, are artificially suppressed in an unconscious default to the past. Now, the totality of the circle is superimposed upon with a cult norm, with a cult shape, which is brainwashed in a variety of traumatic and benign ways into the next generation. Now, what I want to explore is the phenomena of reclaiming the self, the phenomena of reclaiming part of our probability, our possibility field, which means crossing cult lines, going beyond the pale, opening up into taboo terrains. Now, when the self of the infant, the child, etc., is boxed in, often infants in, a few days after birth are incredibly aware, and they have a very large probability field. They can learn to speak any language. They can fit into any culture. It's truly remarkable to travel around the world and find certain habits that 99% of those people in that culture avoid that habit. Then you find an infant who was taken out of that culture and raised in a culture that expressed opposite sides of that cultural continuum. And you find kind of a matter of fact, of course I do this, and of course I don't do that, and I don't know why my country does that. I do this because I identify with the cult that raised me. As every human being moves on a continuum towards growth and self-actualization, we come up against the boundary of our cult, the boundary of men in chauvinistic cultures that says you shall not be sensitive, you shall not present feminine traits, you won't be gentle, you won't do art, you won't dance, you won't play, you won't be emotional, and must transcend these taboos in order to realize the fullness of self. Now, this crossing of the cult line is a tremendously fragile and vulnerable birthing of sorts. Because in the pre-verbal years, these parts of the psyche were boxed off, were strongly discouraged energetically, verbally, by demonstration, and sometimes by public humiliation, imprisonment, shaming. One thinks of the homosexual men in the United States who would be met with violent gangs, gangs of men attacking a man for dressing in feminine garb, etc. And the amount of hostility, the amount of fear, the amount of rage that is directed at the unknown at the crossing of this line can be immense. And it's a fragile boundary, because in the searing truncation of the psyche at birth, there is a cut, there is a wound, as parts of who we are told in no uncertain terms, you are not welcome here. You will not be acknowledged. You will not survive. You will not have a sense of love and belonging. You will not meet, in essence, your human needs if you step into this terrain. Thus, a mass genocide of the psyche occurs. A mass trauma following given cultural lines takes place within each individual. And that separation, where the conscious mind agrees to focus inside the lines and agrees to disown those parts of itself which are not welcome within the cult, there is a wounding, there is a pain, and that pain is also dissociated from, disowned, and shamed. And there is a violation as parts of who we are become unconscious and taboo. Now, if you leave healthy food in a jar, you don't eat it, you don't compost it, you just leave it in a jar, you partition it off, you deny commerce with that food. It slowly turns moldy and smelly and anaerobic and becomes toxic. And many of the parts of our own psyche, for example, the feminine within the man, the masculine within the feminine, not so much because women in chauvinistic cultures are encouraged to be more masculine. They're encouraged to be assertive, not receptive. They're encouraged to talk, not to listen. They're encouraged to lead, not to follow. They're encouraged into the masculine side of the psyche to comply with the chauvinism that is applied towards men and women alike. For a man to go back into his feminine side, perhaps chafing against the small box in which his cult has assigned him, there are a number of things that go on simultaneously. There is the fear of the unknown that is present in any traumatized cult. There is the grief about what was lost in the incarnation process into the cult. There is the atrophy of those parts of the psyche, meaning those parts of the psyche are underdeveloped. Robert Bly talks about the shadow in the sense of putting parts of ourself in a dark room, in a bag, abusing them, denying them nourishment, denying them air, and so those parts of the psyche become deformed, start to smell, start to turn sour. And when we re-encounter them, what we may encounter are the sour, smelly, deformed aspects of the psyche that have grown up in a dark room, hidden from sunlight. This further exonerates and reinforces the cult, because those parts of us that could have blossomed into beautiful, majestic regions of the psyche, that could be among the most exquisite and most beautiful parts of who we are instead dead gardens because they haven't been watered. Revealing the wasteland that may initially present itself, the cult is quick to reassert itself. Remember that a cult has one primary objective, and that is to reinforce the status quo and provide the service that all cults provide to their members, which is to provide a cohesive identity as a way of protecting the members of the cult from their fear of chaos and their fear of the unknown. Traumatized peoples throughout history have become terrified of the unknown because for the most part, our traumas emerge out of the unknown. The unknown is neutral. Literally, every amazing breakthrough in the next 1,000 years, in the next 10,000 years, resides in the unknown. Today it is not known. 10,000 years from now, it will be considered one of the greatest and most significant series of discoveries and learnings and technologies in the history of the species. But today it is unknown. But so many of our traumas, the unexpected shocks, the unexpected betrayals, etc., also emerged from the unknown. And in a semi-conscious and reactive level of consciousness, we become enemies with the unknown. I think this is why Einstein talked about the question, which he said was the most important question to ask, was, do you believe that the universe is a friendly place? Because if you believe that the universe, that the multiverse, is basically friendly, you will have a positive and receptive attitude to strangers, to the unknown, to different peoples, to different cultures, to different planets, to scientific discoveries, to new inspirations and ideas, to art, to creativity, and to change. If, on the other hand, the universe is a hostile place, out to get you, well, the universe is very, very big, and so 99% of it is unknown. What's the distance between star 2,000,087 and star 2,000,088? We don't know. What's happening on the dark side of this star, etc., at this point? We don't know. What's happening 2 miles under the Earth in this particular pocket? We don't know. No matter how much we know, the universe is multidimensional and big enough that 99% of it will always be unknown. And if the projected fear, often stemming from the initial child-parent abuse, meaning the child comes in and is faced with an unknown world, is faced with helplessness, and experiences varying violations, lacks of attunement, abuse, inconsistencies, shocks, etc., and cannot do anything about it. And in a vow, that is every child and adolescent's vow, I'm never going to be helpless again. I'm never going to go into the unknown again and be stuck with someone else being in charge with my life. And so this, intense commitment to certainty and being in control requires us to construct a very fragile and very small set of rules and interactions and protocols, and it's called a culture. And as long as everyone agrees to operate within this very, very narrow bandwidth, hey, what do you want to do? Get a bite? Catch a movie? Watch TV? Go to the game? What else is there? Go to work? I mean, it's an incredibly small repertoire of presumed activities among literally billions and billions of possibilities. You could lay in the dark as a matter of course with 3 people and have intimate conversations in the dark, but that's not on the cultural menu. You could eye gaze for 3 hours and notice what emerges in the hallucinations and mixed perceptions that come between 2 people and discuss those, but that's not on the menu either. You could go for walks where one person is blindfolded and develops trust and etc. But that's not on the menu either. All of these are weird and highly suspect, along with the billion and billions of other options that have not even been articulated so that they can quickly be called weird to go back to. Let's get a bite. Let's catch a movie. Let's watch TV. Let's go to a game. Or go to work. And sleep, etc., is not 20 different types of sleep with multiple styles of dreaming. It's just one kind. You just go to sleep for 6 hours and wake up. The little diversity we do have in areas such as food have, of course, come somewhat reluctantly. We've always been hostile towards the other, the foreigners. And yet that is, thankfully, where we at least get some of the greatest variety as we sample foods from around the world with a growing palette of sophistication. As we enter these new phases of the psyche, we face the scar, we face the fear of the unknown, we face the grief of being cut off from this part of ourself. And sometimes we face the emaciated shapes and forms, the pain, the loneliness of what has been pushed under for decades. But there's an even bigger catastrophe that occurs in the psyche as within a given cult, we step over the cult's line and start owning parts of ourselves that are taboo. And this is the fact that that which is unconscious is dishonored. We're a materialistic culture, and so, of course, we honor the body because it's considered material. A machine, however you want to call it. It's a robot, a machine, an organism, it's matter. So we show some degree of honor to our body. Not a lot, but some degree. And so we take care of the body. We don't, generally go about shooting other people, generally speaking. If I'm standing here and you're walking, you walk around me. Because the body is conscious. It's in the conscious domain. However, those parts of the psyche, those personas that have been suppressed, tabooed, denied, shamed, vilified, and turned into an unconscious region of the psyche through suppression, these are not seen by anyone around us. And so as we venture into that domain, it is as if we are standing here and other people walk right through us, again and again and again, violating in us that which they already have violated in themselves, that which has been violated in them for decades. As a man starts to develop certain emotional sensitivities in connecting with the feminine, as a woman starts to honor certain emotional sensitivities connecting with her feminine, the chauvinism of the cult walks right over those parts with no acknowledgement of the violation. And this further discourages the deviation from cult norms. Because if all of a sudden I'm sensitive to this word or this label or this feeling or this way of doing something is really important to this part of me, it isn't important for the culturally sanctioned part of me. the cult that sanctions keeping busy, for example, has no problem walking in on someone who's daydreaming and saying, come on, let's do something. Because daydreaming doesn't exist within the cult vocabulary as a valuable activity. And so it is violated. Noise trumps silence. Activity trumps solitude, trumps stillness. In many groups, someone will think absolutely nothing, hitting you on the back to shake you out of a reverie in order to do the culturally sanctioned thing, which is a game is starting, a show is starting, etc. We've got to do what everyone else is doing, but there's no acknowledgement of what was cut off, or of the value of what was cut off, or of the basis, even the paradigm that would allow a culturally taboo, a culturally unconscious activity to make sense. Doesn't exist. The paradigm has been cut off. The value hierarchy has been cut off. Thus, the choice and the strategy is invisible and is cut off. And in seeking to advocate, one is not only dealing with the grief, not only dealing with the sadness, the narrowness, the fact that that part is malnourished and perhaps more reactive than it otherwise would be. One is faced with daily emotional, physical, energetic violations that intensify the pain of residing outside the cult line. Now, when this is not understood in a culturally illiterate cult, because the last things most cults want to do is examine their nature, examine their uniqueness relative to other cults that have existed before and that are existing in other parts of the world, and understand that each cult is better at certain things relative to certain values and worse at certain things relative to certain values. And it is not objectively superior in all ways to all values. This, of course, leads to creativity and to fluidity. It leads to cult transformation, which, when the primary goal of the cult is to protect the individuals in the cult from their fear of the unknown by blocking all change, there is an intense fear that hits up, often transforming into anger and violence, that brutally attacks deviation from the norm. When you are a minority, depending on a majority for survival, for security, for love and belonging, the first three human needs in the hierarchy of human needs. And you have the choice between fitting into a box handed down by the cult, or facing the grief and remorse about undernourished portions of the self, going into the unknown, not, opening up to areas we're not skillful. Because, of course, you and I, being good cult members, are skillful at getting a bite. We know how to whip out a piece of plastic that's supposedly worth something. We know how to drive there. But we're not skillful at picking up on energy laying in a dark room for 3 hours, with that being the point. Let's both lay in a dark room and see how many energies we can pick up on. Here we have no competence because it's outside the cult's norms. Now, there may well have been a cult among the 10,000 cults where that form of intelligence, where that form of technology was highly developed, highly specialized, and people could do it like that. And if you took those individuals and dumped them into our cult, said, hey, let's get a bite, you drive. They don't know what a car is. They don't know what driving is. They're puzzled with this endless fascination of getting a bite as a primary activity. And why all the obesity as a result? I mean, what's going on here? The whole thing seems absurd. And besides that, it's all unknown to them. That's not what's done in that cult. And so that would be fearfully avoided. The trouble, of course, when cults fail to examine themselves, because their primary fear is that of the unknown, is in all relationships, in all processes, that which at one time saved, rescued, liberated freedom for an individual or a group becomes the greatest enemy, becomes the greatest obstacle to further well-being, development, survival at some point in the growth process. If you're walking on a path and you're at stepping stone 1, stepping stone 2 in the path of where you're wanting to go is sacred. It is necessary for your journey to continue, as then is step 3. But if you're on step 3, step 1 is now a liability. That's going backwards. And so in this process, it's a challenge, while being terrified of the unknown, to continually look at what's the next step for a cult, for an individual. And I think this is why Einstein said the question, do you believe the universe is a friendly place, is the most important question as a species. Because if you are afraid of the universe, perhaps because you are afraid of yourself, perhaps because your cult is afraid of the parts of you that don't fit within the box, and is so terrified of the parts of you that don't fit into the box that they give infants and children and teenagers the message, we will kill you, we will hate you, we will exclude you, we will not employ you if you step outside of the box. You will not survive. You certainly won't have love and belonging and a sense of esteem if you step outside these lines. And these are the markers that I meet as a man exploring tenderness, exploring the vast sweeps of a conscious landscape, exploring timescapes that don't fit into text-like sound bites, that don't fit into 20-minute lunches, that take hours and days and months to sculpt out, all viewed in little short bits in which there's no cultural lens to step back and perceive the monthscape, the yearscape, the 4-yearscape. There's just a time to step back and perceive the little soundbite of interesting things, not vulnerable things, interesting things, because we're a cult in which mental interest is elevated. And emotional responsiveness is suppressed. Emotional presence, particularly in the moment between two individuals, is suppressed. Emotional outbursts are fine if they are programmed and reactive as what someone is supposed to feel about something and how they're supposed to feel it and for how long. Those are little robotic programs. But the deeper feelings behind that take one instantly and rapidly into the person's fear of any real feeling. Understanding this paradigm is important because as a cult and as a species, we adapt or we die. And we can do our adaptive process by fighting the unknown, and then being traumatized by the built-up force of the majority of reality that implodes and destroys the myopia of a very small portion of reality. We are a part of the ecology in which we relate, in which we say that we occupy. It's somewhat of a reference of dominance or something, but really we are a part. We are integrated with our ecology, and our ecology is 99.999% bigger than we are. It is the larger part of the self, and it is in a dance of change and growth, which means that our cults require more and more energy to fight the breath, the change of reality, to maintain the status quo in the face of a desperate need to breathe, to move. If we understand that grief, pain, overwhelm, and fear await us at the boundary of our cult, not because there's anything wrong with the psyche, not because there's anything wrong with us, but because those energies are predisposed by a cult that artificially cuts us down to size and punishes those who break the taboo. We can reframe these feelings, these greetings, as a message of transcending our culture, of growing up. Because living within a cult is living as a child. To be an adult in which we step beyond the artificial pre-programmed language of the status quo. We must examine our own values. We must examine our own truths and determine for ourselves how we want to refract the circle. How symmetrically we can refract the circle of our reality. How many complexities, how many distinctions through language and consciousness we can introduce into our circle of reality. And how much of who we are we can consciously embrace and honor in our reality and in our relationship with ourselves and reality and in our relationship with others. Because we cannot honor in another that which is unconscious and consistently violated within ourselves, whether we are doing the violating or allowing others to. This terrain is met as we step beyond the pale. The pale was the stone wall in Ireland where the imposition of Church of England, of law, the imposition of structured cult was defined. And beyond that, fairies, elves, psychedelics, magic, heathen dances, nature spirits, orgies, beyond the pale was all that existed outside of the structure of the United Kingdom of England. And that's what it was called, the pale, the stone wall. If it was beyond the pale, You couldn't even keep track of it. It was the unknown. It was the mysterious. When we step outside of our cult, outside of the secrets that cannot be told, the controls that cannot be violated, the things that we cannot be aware of and the things that we cannot express. When we step outside that, we will face this terrain, and we will, in a sense, be participating in the adaptation and the evolution of our cult. Because in many ways the hero's journey takes place when the cult's limited frame of reference is too narrow, when the reality presents the cult with a dragon that cannot be fought within the paradigm of the cult. The hero must venture outside of the known. They must go through fire. They must go out there and find something that will work with the challenge, and they must bring it back with their cult. If you look at the Emerald Forest and the initiation rite of the young man, the Emerald Forest being a movie that speaks to some of the initiation rites in some of the Amazon tribes. As part of the initiation into manhood, the young man faces sleep deprivation, faces discipline, faces the pain of the stinging ants. He is shot out into hyperspace through psychedelic snuff, into a vision, and the entire tribe circles him, understanding that all the gifts of the tribe are out there in the unknown, and that the tribe must protect the young man in this fragile transition from the childhood of the cult into adulthood by allowing him to go outside the bounds. And in the movie, he sees the location of some of the sacred gems that are running out in the tribe, and travels on a journey through the unknown, a perilous journey in which some do not return. Not every hero returns and completes the hero's journey. Some die, some get paralyzed, some get distracted. But a healthy and mature tribe understands that to keep the tribe vital and alive, they must continuously and ritualistically, from time to time, break out of the womb of certainty and familiarity and go into the vast mindscapes of consciousness, the vast mindscapes of the larger world. And they celebrate the return as the celebration of a new birth, not only the birth of an adult, but the birth of a new gift, of an energy brought back to the tribe.